All right, let's dive right into this explainer and explore how environmental engineers use complex mathematical forecasting to basically build the cities of tomorrow. It's kind of wild to think about the invisible frameworks that make modern society function. Today, we're going to unpack the exact science behind how city planners predict the future to keep our water flowing and our cities thriving. So here's the ultimate engineering dilemma. We have to build critical, massive-scale infrastructure today for populations that won't actually arrive for decades. You literally can't just build a reservoir for the people living in a town today, because in 20 years, if that town doubles in size, the whole system will collapse. We actually have to predict the unborn and the future immigrants of a city to design these systems effectively.
We've got a great lineup for this explainer. We're going to cover why this forecasting actually matters, and then walk through the main methods engineers use, from the arithmetic to the geometric and incremental methods, the logistic curve, a couple of visual approaches, and finally, how to choose the absolute best one.
So, kicking things off with our first point, the sheer scale of this engineering dilemma and why it matters so much.
Before we even touch the math, we absolutely have to understand the stakes here. Every single component of a city's water system has a design period, basically a lifespan it must survive before being replaced. Dams, they're built to last up to a century. Water treatment plants need to endure for up to 25 years, and distribution pipelines for up to 45 years. If our math is wrong, cities literally go bankrupt building massive plants for ghost towns, or they suffer catastrophic overflows because they underestimated a population boom.
Okay, let's move on to our baseline, the arithmetic method.
This is basically the simplest forecasting tool in the engineer's toolbox. It assumes completely straight-line growth that the population increases by a constant number every single decade. Now, this method is generally most applicable to large, very old, and already established cities. Think of those massive cities that have pretty much hit their territorial limits and are just slowly, steadily adding our predictable number of residents over time.
The formula driving this is perfectly linear. The change in population over time equals a simple constant, called K. To put that into perspective, if a city grew by 10,000 people in the 90s and another 10,000 in the 2000s, this method just assumes, hey, it's going to grow by exactly 10,000 in the 2010s, too.
But let's be real. Populations rarely grow in perfectly straight lines, which brings us to the exponential reality, the geometric and incremental methods.
Instead of adding a flat, constant number, the geometric increase method assumes the average percentage increase remains constant. This is hugely important for new, booming industrial towns at the very beginning of their development, where massive economic opportunity drives rapid, compounding migration and birth rates.
When you compare the two formulas, the contrast is pretty wild. With the arithmetic method, the rate of change is just a static number. But with the geometric rate, that constant is multiplied by the population itself. It's exactly like compound interest. As the population gets bigger, the raw growth gets bigger too.
That simple shift from just adding raw numbers to multiplying by percentages completely changes a city's trajectory. The arithmetic method gives us a really conservative estimate. The geometric method, it yields much higher estimates, which is a lot safer for avoiding future water shortages, but definitely risks overspending if the boom eventually fizzles out. Now, since those first two are kind of absolute extremes, engineers came up with a really clever compromise, the incremental increase method. It's a fantastic middle ground solution that maps out a normal average-sized town with an increasing growth rate. It takes the base average numerical increase and then adds an incremental increase to account for the fact that the rate of growth itself might actually be growing.
All right, stepping into our next section, let's talk about the biological limits of growth with the logistic curve method.
Because in the real world, populations just cannot grow forever. The logistic curve brings a heavy dose of biological reality right into civil engineering. It introduces the concept of finite space and resources, meaning our hypothetical city will eventually hit a carrying capacity. It assumes that population growth is a function of time, sure, but it is ultimately restricted by what we call environmental resistance, things like strict limits on housing space, water supply, and economic opportunities.
This environmental resistance creates a very distinct S-shape over time. Growth starts slow, booms upward exponentially during its geometric phase, and then hits what's called a critical point of inflection. That's where the resistance really kicks in, flattening the growth out as the city hits its absolute saturation limit, known as PDUS. The mathematics behind this are beautifully complex. Engineers use historical census data taken at equal time intervals to actually solve for Ps, the maximum population the environment can safely handle.
By plugging those historical figures into the model, they can predict the exact decade that S-curve will start to flatten out, which dictates the absolute maximum size of the necessary water treatment facilities.
So, what if we step away from the pure equations for a minute? That brings us to our visual approaches, the graphical and ratio methods.
Sometimes looking at a city in a total vacuum just isn't enough. The ratio method forecasts local population by tying it directly to the national or regional population. It's an incredibly clever technique because it connects the fate of a single city to the established, much more heavily researched trajectory of the entire country. You basically figure out the ratio of your city's population to the whole nation's over a few decades. Then you extend that specific trend out to your target design year, say 2010 for instance, and simply multiply that extrapolated ratio by the expected national numbers to get a highly localized estimate. Or there's the curvilinear graphical method. This one is fascinating. It lets planners predict their city's future by literally tracing the past growth curves of similar, slightly older cities. If we are City A, we can look at City B and City C, which developed under similar conditions but are decades older. We just overlap their past populations with our present and use their historical growth paths as a literal guiding line for our future infrastructure needs.
Okay, bringing it all together now, choosing the right method.
With all these tools in the syllabus, which one actually gives us the most reliable data to start pouring concrete? Well, a comparative study from the ISOR journal tested these methods against real census data, and the results are pretty striking. The arithmetical method had nearly a 9% error rate, and even the highly sophisticated logistic curve was off by about 1.75%. But the geometrical method? It was astoundingly accurate with a microscopic 0.88% error margin. The researchers concluded that the geometric increase method is simply a realistic population model based on past information. Because it mathematically mimics the continuous compounding nature of human growth, it just captures reality way better than a flat line. And sure, while it tends to give a slightly higher estimate, that built-in buffer actually makes it the most trusted blueprint for ensuring we absolutely do not underbuild our vital water systems.
So, we've explored the mathematics that quite literally construct our civilization. The next time you're walking through your town, looking at the water flowing from your tap or the roads you're driving on, ask yourself, which of these mathematical curves brought all of this into reality? And more importantly, which formula is being calculated right now to design the city your grandchildren will live in? Thanks for exploring the science of tomorrow with me on This Explainer.